In this video, we'll look back at the exploits of the Shadowlands at some of the most broken video game exploits ever created. How single players could control vast armies of NPCs, literally darkening the skies and dominating entire zones, duping experience and gold, turning tiny gnomes into raid bosses, and killing entire raid groups with a single spell. We'll discuss exactly what happened and why, the fascinating cat and mouse game the exploit community played with Blizzard, and the strange, distorted, permanent legacy it left for modern Warcraft. On November the 23rd, 2020, Blizzard Entertainment released the Shadowlands expansion. It proved to be one of the most controversial releases in Blizzard's history, and came very close to destroying the game altogether. But for me, it was Christmas morning, New Year's Eve, and a birthday all rolled into one glorious dumpster fire. You see, my name is Archvaldor, and I like to find broken code in video games. And Shadowlands was one of the best ever expansions for finding broken stuff which didn't work, producing some of the most spectacular ever game-breaking exploits. Let's look back at that wonderful magical time in WoW's history where you could assemble armies of gigantic bears to murder things with, darken the skies with Valkyr, create mountains of gold, and destroy other player accounts with absolutely no combat. And crucially, answer the question, just how broken was Shadowlands? So somehow at the start of Shadowlands I got into beta. This is the only time that ever happened to me. For several days a Blizzard employee followed me around invisibly inside the beta world. How did I know this? Because I'd been warned by the leader of a very high-level hacking syndicate Blizzard do this. So I was skeptical at first. I really didn't think they'd bother with someone like me. So I proceeded to test some of the most minor and pointless exploits in WoW. Things that were of absolutely no consequence and certainly not worth fixing. In every case, the exploit was fixed almost instantaneously. These were things that had been in the game in some cases for years, so I'm pretty certain I must have been shadowed the whole time I was in beta. It would have been a huge coincidence for these things to be fixed at exactly the same time. Having established this was the case, I could only do a limited amount of research into Shadowlands early on, but I did make a video exploring the new Covenant abilities Blizzard had introduced. It was clear from the start that this was going to be a very buggy expansion. Many of the Covenant abilities I could talk about openly because they allowed you to do things which were already well-known exploits that for coding and cost reasons Blizzard had been unable or unwilling to fix in the past. Although you could use these exploits with older methods, the Covenant abilities often greatly enhance the power of these methods by extending their use to multiple classes, allowing them to be used in conjunction with other abilities where it was normally impossible, and often simply allowed you to break the game much faster than with older methods. The powers awarded for joining a Covenant, I have to say, were and are visually stunning. There's something so fluid and visceral about them. The first major exploit occurred during pre-patch. There was a themed event in Icecrown Northrend where players had to take on Scourge bosses in exchange for a currency for catch-up weapons and armor and cosmetic items. Blizzard seemed to have forgotten how buggy the spellsteal mechanic was in Northrend during Wrath of the Lich King when the continent was first introduced. Spellsteal is a mage ability which allows you to steal powerful buffs from other players and non-player characters. In particular, the Valkyrian aspirant mobs in the Storm Peaks, right next to Icecrown, have the Metanoia buff, the most powerful buff ever in World of Warcraft. It gives a significant bonus to critical strike damage. A mage can steal it from multiple aspirants it stacks and gain effectively infinite power. You have the ability to literally one-shot everything. It was possible to gather together multiple Valkyrian aspirants, steal their buffs, then fly into Icecrown and destroy every player or boss that you could find during the 2-minute duration the buffs provided you with. It was enormous fun. The slow build-up punctuated by short bursts of magical, mindless violence. This was a rare occasion when me and Rextroy were going after the same prize. Apparently Rextroy had a video of himself blowing up an entire horde raid using Arcane Explosion, which he never released, simply on the basis that I had got to publish first. For that reason, I mostly avoided this type of one-shot exploit for the rest of the expansion, on the basis that that's Rextroy's speciality, and focused on my more broad-based approach to exploits. The next video was an exception, however, and wonderfully simple. Someone working for Blizzard actually understands the concept of fun, and designed the wonderful item Momentum Redistributor Boots. This basically translates full damage into area of effect damage. You just fall from a great height and kill anything you land on. Originally, this item translated all of your full damage into AoE damage, making this a guaranteed one-shot of any players in the area. I just love plays like this, which are incredibly simple. There's something wonderfully moronic about dive-bombing a bunch of players and one-shotting them. Sadly, Blizzard's fun police were out in force for this one, and it got fixed shortly afterwards. The boots are still in the game, but they only do 20% of the player's health in damage. Shadowlands introduced a whole class of class abilities which were totally overpowered and completely broken. Since I main a fire mage, I noticed the pyroclasm's potential for one-shotting other players when appropriately buffed, and worked out a way to attack the horde out of melee range so I could get the cast off. This next glitch is arguably one of the greatest ever exploits in World of Warcraft, and it is certainly the most visually spectacular. You simply quested through the Western Plaguelands till you got to the Ardenweald quest, An Ace in the Hole. Now, this quest had been glitched for some time. You could take the Valkyr you were given for the quest into Battlegrounds and other content if you teleported at the right moment. Blizzard tried to fix it, and in the process broke the quest harder than any quest has ever been broken. It triggered this insane army of Valkyrs. This was fantastic for leveling and gold farming. They could demolish literally everything. This was the start of a long series of glitches which persisted throughout the expansion, where some quest awarded you a pet or guardian and bugged out, awarding you a massive army. This next glitch was very enjoyable and was unbelievably simple to activate. This was during the Love is in the Air event. You got a buff from one of the main quest givers, logged out, logged back in again, and you were as powerful as a raid boss with a huge health pool. Blizzard caught onto this pretty quickly, and by the time I finished the video, I had only minutes left to get some interesting footage. So I went to Orgrimmar and became literally the smallest raid boss ever. It was a lot of fun. The next major exploit was one of the most enjoyable I've ever experienced. A world quest turned you into a bear. This was in Ardenweald. When Blizzard do a quest like this, they use their vehicle-based tech, which is notoriously glitchy. You see, vehicles are basically hunter pets for coding purposes, and when they glitch out, they revert to that natural state. So if you exited the bear vehicle just as you were entering it, your character would get a bear pet that would fight for you, just as a hunter pet does. More importantly, you could just keep doing this and make an infinite bear army. While not quite as mesmerizingly photogenic as the army of Valkyrs, the bears were very strong, even individually, and could one-shot everything in groups. Moreover, this was current content at the time, so you could burn through quests and farm stupid amounts of gold. In fact, it wasn't just the bears, it was pretty much every quest pet in Ardenweald that was bugged. Stags, moths, panthers. Some things in Ardenweald have never been fixed to this day. Midway through Shadowlands, Blizzard inexplicably released what is undeniably the most broken class ability ever introduced to World of Warcraft. I remember veteran exploiters being literally dumbfounded by Blizzard's incompetence over this one. We just really couldn't believe they did it. Shadow Rift works like this. A warlock puts down a demonic circle. When he casts Shadow Rift, any enemy player caught in its radius is teleported to its location. This might have worked if Blizzard's scenery wasn't notoriously buggy. In fact, there are numerous locations in which you can trap other players using this ability. Incredibly, some years now after Shadow Rift was first introduced, Blizzard have never really attempted to clean it up properly, and it remains totally broken to this day. The next major exploit of the expansion came from an amazing quest-based glitch in Revendreth. When you got into the carriage here and entered a battleground, you became invincible, with the major downside that you couldn't move. However, after a ton of testing, I found that if you queued for the Seething Shore battleground, you could retain your invincibility and move. What happened here was that when Blizzard move you around in a vehicle in a quest, they use the same tech as they use for flight paths, and this makes you invincible while you are moving. You could imagine the problems if low-level players were getting one shot while on griffins. Normally, when you teleport off any kind of quest vehicle, the game won't let you, or you are automatically dismounted. But in this case, someone at Blizzard forgot to do that. Maybe they thought that it didn't matter because you couldn't move, but I found that there was something in Seething Shore which changed that. Probably the fact that Seething Shore starts on a flying ship. These have weird mechanics and rules of their own. In one of the later patches of Shadowlands, Blizzard introduced invasions into the Maw. The idea here being that you and your Shadowlands allies would take the fight to the jailer in Warcraft's own version of Hell. By that I mean the Maw, not the player experience generally. This had a whole load of interesting and broken mechanics associated with it. My favourite being a spell you could spell steal off these constructs here. It allowed the mage to do 200% extra damage and move at super speed. That was more than enough to obliterate any enemy players in the vicinity. Another exploit that I discovered in the Maw was a Shadowlands specific leveling exploit. The Maw intro scenario contained a very powerful elite mob that awarded a ton of experience. This thing had a massive health pool and was by design totally impractical to kill for an individual or group of players. But during the Maw intro questline, you obtain some very powerful non-player characters to assist you, and these could make short work of the mob. You could do this again and again, mostly AFK. The next two major exploits I discovered were both based around the Warlock's Shadow Rift ability. This video, the most evil WoW exploit, was a rare example of something I actually thought was so game-breaking. I did really want to bring it to Blizzard's attention. I don't normally do this because, well, frankly, I don't give a toss about Blizzard, but in this case, ordinary players could have their characters essentially killed permanently by malicious players, and I didn't want to see that happen. Using one of a number of glitches to get under the world, you could use Shadow Rift to teleport a player into a location where they would fall into the void. Their character would remain trapped, falling through the void forever. To show how much Blizzard value their players, this glitch can still be done today. This next video is almost certainly the strongest PvP exploit ever discovered in WoW. It allows you not to just kill, but actually imprison players for an entire battleground. These towers in Ashran are hollow. If a warlock can put down a demonic circle there, you can imprison any number of players inside if they get caught in the warlock's Shadow Rift radius. As game-breaking as this is, Blizzard have essentially done nothing about it for 3 years. I thought they would fix it instantly. And you will still see this tactic employed in Ashran to the present day. So, was Shadowlands the most broken expansion? In terms of exploits, yes. There was just an extraordinary amount of sloppy coding, and fun exploits kept happening. What you've seen in this video is just scratching at the surface. A full video covering everything I found and other things people discovered outside of my network that would last hours. I haven't even mentioned the extraordinary amount of problems the introduction of Torghast caused. There are still things there you can glitch out to this day. During the expansion, I found one of the best ever experience dupes. I'm showing a redacted version here. Because of plays like this, I could have sold that one to a syndicate for $50,000 easily, but I gave it away for $10 on my Patreon. Due to plays like this and the fact everyone was in lockdown playing video games, the exploit community was booming during this time. It was a very fun, exciting time to be finding bugs. In terms of game integrity and sheer bugginess, not just talking about glitches that were useful exploits, the current War Within expansion is far, far worse. We are really in a state of permanent beta testing in live retail now. You see, the problem for the exploit community was that we were way too successful. I actually made a conscious decision to scale back my own audience because something happened during Shadowlands which I never anticipated. We kind of won. Blizzard gave up. They stopped trying to fix their own game and abandoned whole areas of Warcraft forever. Epic PvP, for example, became completely unplayable, dominated by pre-mades charging money for access using various add-ons to group together, and make the experience for new players very unpleasant, leading to the current mess you see on retail. This wasn't really anything to do with me or people like Rextroy or WoW Secrets, or less well-known individuals on Owncore, who come up with creative and interesting exploits to add something new to the game. It was down to lower-level bottom-feeding exploitation like botting and queue dodging, intellectually tedious and very disruptive to the general player experience when practiced on an industrial scale and never dealt with. As to the expansion itself, I think there was an awful lot of drama focused around the issue of gating everything for alts, which admittedly was just an unbelievably stupid error. You can't expect people to do exactly the same mediocre content multiple times over just to use some different spells or abilities. The final patch was actually pretty good, probably the best since the Timeless Isle. By then though, most players had quit. The huge numbers brought in at launch had just left by that stage, unfortunately. Most of the problems had been fixed by that stage. The content gating had been completely removed by multiple catch-up mechanisms. A big part of the problem was that Blizzard's greatest strengths, an ability to tell stories. Not great stories, but compelling stories done with passion, if not perfect execution, was fatally damaged by lead story developer Steve Deneuze's incompetence, and so much of the lore changed for the worse that many players chose to ignore the expansion altogether. Finally, on a more personal note, I'd like to thank my patrons who allowed me and my family to survive during what was a very difficult time for everyone.